Right then, here we go with an attempt to do why Germany lost the war in 15 minutes for the third form. So it's time to go get your parents, pull up the comfy sofas, get a cup of tea and sit back and relax while we smash through 6 reasons, or maybe get your pen out and scribble furiously to get as much stuff down as you can. So here's our map of Germany, as you can tell, obviously, brilliantly drawn. And the pictures are going to come in to indicate the reasons. I'm going to write some keywords on the board as well. Hopefully you'll be able to read them. And we are going to just move that tiny bit. There we go. See how many reasons we can get why Germany lost. Here's our first one coming in the top left. Here it is. This one, as you can see, the ships of the British Navy up here, and this root vegetable down here simulates reason number 1, and that is the naval blockade carried out by the British Navy, particularly very tight after 1916. They fought a battle called the Battle of Jutland, and they cut off supplies coming through to Germany from the North Sea. The Brits had the largest navy in the world at the time. Germany was not able to import supplies. This is where Denmark is up here, this is where the Netherlands is over here, and Belgium is over here. Germany has a narrow North Sea coastline. They couldn't get any supplies in, which meant that when they started to run out of potatoes in the winter of 1916-17, they had to eat instead turnips. They called it the turnip winter of 1916-17. In 1918, the Spanish flu started to hit. Thousands and thousands of Germans start to starve or can't get medical supplies. So in total, 750,000 Germans died. Civilians, we're talking about not soldiers, died in the First World War. Lots to do with malnutrition and starvation and lack of medical attention. Because of the naval blockade, people started to turn against the war. That's reason number 1. Reason number 2, coming in the bottom left here. Hopefully that's fairly easy. That is to do with the United States of America. Number 2, the USA. The Americans entered the war on the side of the Allies in April 1917. Partly because of some cheeky German subterfuge by trying to get the Mexicans to fight against America because they felt the Americans were helping out the Allies too much, and partly because of unrestricted submarine warfare where the Germans were sinking everything they could that was coming into Britain. And the Americans lost the ships. They got very upset about that, so they joined the war on the side of the Allies. But it took them about a year to get going. So by the time you got to the middle of 1918, 100,000 Americans on average are turning up on the Western Front every month. Every month. The commander was called General Pershing. His troops were called the Doughboys. There's a long story why the American troops are called Doughboys. Come and ask me, I'll tell you one time. And there were 1 million of them by late summer 1918, and the manpower that this gave the Allies was absolutely crucial. 1 million American troops. They'd been losing troops for the last 4 years against the Germans in the attritional battles of the First World War. They needed fresh legs and fresh men to carry the fight for the Germans in the summer of 1918. So we've got 2 reasons so far. Starting to outnumber the Germans. Germans starting to run out of food. Let's go for reason number 3. We'll clear the board a little bit. Okay, if you've seen the video on the end of the war, you'll definitely recognise this character. This is reason number 3. And that, you can see the Germans are attacking here on the Western Front. That is Erich Ludendorff, and he launched the famous offensive in March 1918. And it was phenomenally successful for the Germans. They crashed forward and made advances on the Western Front like no one had ever seen. In fact, at one point, they were only 37 miles from Paris. They were in sight of capturing the French capital. They'd reached the River Marne. They were using these brilliant new tactics whereby they trained up small groups of men, they gave them extra rations, they took them out of the lines for months at a time and trained them in their new tactics of small groups rushing forward. They used submachine guns, they had flamethrowers, they had loads of grenade, and they were really, really successful. Stormtrooper tactics. However, unfortunately for the Germans, they did too well. They advanced too far, too fast. And that sounds ridiculous, but in the First World War, if you're advancing over the trenches and the muddy battles of the war, it's very difficult to supply your men. It's very difficult to get them ammunition, very difficult to get them food and water. And the Germans attacking for a whole month, they get completely exhausted. And they also sustain lots and lots and lots of casualties. So they're now very far up the line. They've outrun their artillery. They can't be covered by their massive guns anymore. And the German army is exhausted, and it's sustained probably 1 million casualties. Even though they're very successful, it came at a cost. And the Germans could not afford those casualties, and it left them vulnerable to a counterattack. So the Allies were able to... Okay, here's part 2 of the video for why Germany lost the war in 1918. We were rudely interrupted and cut off because of lack of storage on the iPad for part 1. Just left it with the Ludendorff offensive, leaving the German army overextended, exhausted, vulnerable to counterattack, and the Allies are just about to hit back. And this is exactly what they're going to do for reason number 4. You can see it coming in down here. Here's a picture of Allied tactics used with particularly devastating effect in what's called the 100 Days. The 100 Days. And this reason is all about the improvements in the Allied military forces and the new tactics they were using. So it's a bit small, but you might be able to see here. You've got tanks, you've got aeroplanes, fighters and bombers of the newly formed RAF. You've got infantry advancing behind the tanks here. You've got cavalry coming up behind. And you had artillery with a constant bombarding of the enemy positions, all combining together. So it's sometimes called combined operations that the Allies start to use with devastating effect from August the 8th until the end of the war, November the 11th, often known as the 100 Days, where they win victory after victory and keep pushing the German army back in a war of movement that hadn't happened for the 4 years of stalemate in the First World War. So it's combining the use of tanks. They used 400 tanks at the Battle of Amiens in, I'll give you an example, e.g. Battle of Amiens. On the 8th of August, that's on the 8th of August 1918, and they used 600 aeroplanes on the same day. They got 8 miles in a single day. That's about as far as they got in the four and a half months of fighting on the Battle of the Somme. It was called the Black Day for the German army. And those tactics were seen as being really effective and a massive improvement for the British, the Australians, the Canadians, and they taught the French and the Americans how to do it, kept pushing the German army back, so they were exhausted, they were struggling, they were starving at home, and now they're being beaten on the battlefield as well. You can see the Germans in full retreat here, running away at the edge of that picture. So, that's 4 reasons, 2 to go. Reason number 5, coming in the bottom right here, hopefully we're just about to see that. Yep, here we've got 3 flags representing the 3 major allies of Germany, and what we call the Central Powers at the start of the First World War. Here you have the flag of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austro-Hungary. This one, how's your knowledge? That one's Bulgaria. And this one down here, you should know that one, that's the same as it is these days. That's the Ottoman Empire, which you guys will know as Turkey. It didn't become called Turkey until 1923. So those are the 3 main allies of Germany in the First World War. The Austrians start getting beaten by the Italians down here on the Italian front in the Alps. Bulgarians and the Ottomans were struggling from many years of war, and all of them start to collapse, and it all happens around about the same time. So they all surrendered. Germany's allies is number 5. They all surrendered. Bulgaria surrendered in September, and then the Ottomans surrendered in October 1918. The Austro-Hungarians surrendered in October 1918, which meant by November, Germany was the only one of the Central Powers fighting against the combined might of Britain and France and Italy and the States, and the likes of Portugal and Romania as well, which not many people remember. But Germany was left alone, and it could not carry on the fight against overwhelming superiority and manpower of the Allies, and they were knackered and exhausted as well by this stage. So it was time to wave the white flag for Germany's perspective. One final reason, coming in the middle of the map here. Okay, this resplendent fellow with the eagle on his helmet there, who some of you guys should have remembered from the first test that we did, I think, on the First World War. That's the Kaiser. Kaiser Wilhelm II, Emperor of Germany, the man whose great plan it was to create a place in the sun and taken Germany into war. Well, by this time the Germans had fed up with it. And number 6, there's revolution. So here you see a picture of anarchy and turmoil and chaos fighting on the streets of Berlin. It started on October the 25th, went on until November the 9th. In 1918 in Germany, where the starving German people had had enough of war, the army was starting to lose, they weren't being fed, they were dying in their thousands, and they revolt against the Kaiser's regime. He abdicates, means he gives up his throne, and he fled to the Netherlands, where he got to live out his days as a country gentleman and avoided any punishment for the war at all. But this upheaval led to politicians having no choice but to surrender to the Allies, and therefore, as you should know, an armistice, a ceasefire, was agreed at 11 o'clock on the 11th of November, the 11th day of the 11th month, and so ended the most horrific conflict that mankind had ever seen, possibly 20 million soldiers and civilians dying as a result of it, and a massive event in our history, and one really worth studying. And you guys should know a hell of a lot more about it and about the end of the war now. Okay, good luck writing up some work on that one.